As the cost of living skyrockets across the country, it's hard for Montreal not to follow that trend. Quebec has rules to protect renters, but in order for them to be applied, you have to be a pretty savvy tenant, wading through misinformation, bureaucracy, and even language barriers when learning about your rights. Advocates and lawyers say the more you know, the more you can contribute to keeping the city affordable. So we're going to dive into some questions you might not even know that you should be asking as a tenant in Quebec. Does my landlord have to show me the previous tenant's rent? Yes, the previous tenant's rent should be provided under Section G on your lease, so right here. And sometimes landlords will leave this section blank. If you discover that your rent is drastically higher than what the previous tenant paid, you have 2 months from discovering that evidence to apply to the Tribunal Administratif du Logement, which is the administrative court in Quebec that oversees rental issues. You can apply to them for a hearing to fix the rent. We'll get into how and why a landlord can increase the rent in a sec. But typically, they have to follow a formula for calculating an increase and can only do so once per year. For example, the landlord has to give 3 months notice for modifying the lease in any way, including a rent increase, before a year-long lease is up for renewal, and it's a bit less than that for shorter leases. Do I have to accept my rent increase? No, you can reject a rent increase and renew your lease. You have 1 month to respond to the rent increase notice, but make sure to respond in writing. After they get your refusal, your landlord has 1 month to either negotiate a lower rent with you or to apply to fix the rent at the tribunal. At the hearing, the judge will decide if your landlord's increase is justified based largely on a calculation of municipal and school taxes, and if work was done either on the building or on your dwelling. You can ask for receipts and the breakdown of that calculation. If you don't refuse the increase, you have 2 other options. Either you end your lease and you move, or if you don't respond, it's assumed that you've accepted the increase and any other modifications to the lease, and it's renewed automatically. If your landlord didn't do any repairs or renovations on the building, the typical increase in Quebec is of about 1 to 2%. And if they did, for example, for about $10,000 of work or repairs done on your unit, that would be about a $20 increase. Work done on the building as a whole comes out to less because it's split by the number of units. Remember, you have a right to contest any modification to a lease, and that includes a rent increase, or no longer being allowed to have pets, or no longer having access to a bike room or a parking spot. Are rent decreases possible? Yes, rent decreases are possible. Some years taxes and energy costs go down, and if there wasn't any work done on your building, you could negotiate a lower rent. Another situation where this is possible is if, when your lease is modified, you lose access to a privilege, let's say a parking spot, laundry, or even a backyard. Can my landlord kick me out for renovations? Rarely. Unless they're tearing down walls to repurpose the building, you have a right to maintain occupancy. If you have to vacate your place while they do renovations, such as revamping your kitchen, your landlord has to give you 10 days notice if it's for less than a week, 3 months notice if you have to leave for more than a week, and 6 months notice if they're doing work that is substantial enough to evict you, such as making significant alterations to the very makeup of the building and to your apartment. These are often called renovictions, and you do have a right to refuse that proposal as long as it's in written form within 10 days of the landlord's notice. They can't start renovating until the tribunal has made a decision, and if the eviction goes through, They have to pay you 3 months' rent and reasonable moving costs. If you find out you were evicted for reasons that turned out not to be true, you have 3 years to sue the landlord for evicting you in bad faith. Can my landlord refuse a lease transfer? Almost never, but they can if they can prove that the person you're proposing to take over the lease can't afford to pay the rent. Or if the person is exhibiting what the province calls problematic behavior. Say they refuse to meet in person or they're being super uncooperative. Your landlord has 15 days to come up with a reason not to go through with the transfer. And if you think that reason isn't justifiable, you can take it to the tribunal. Can my landlord access my dwelling anytime? No. They have to let you know 24 hours in advance unless it's an emergency like a fire or serious water damage and they need access to your unit right away to prevent damage. Make sure to let your landlord know if there is something that's causing damage in your unit because you could be liable for that damage if it gets worse. If there's repair work to be done in your unit, it has to take place between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. If your landlord's visits don't feel necessary, you can reach out to the tribunal or you can reach out to your local borough's renters committee. Their services are free. What else should I know as a renter in Quebec? Here are a few more things to keep in mind. You can't sign away something that is illegal. If you do sign a contract that ends up being illegal, you're protected by the tribunal, so don't worry, you haven't signed your life away. But advocates and lawyers do warn against signing any new proposal on the spot. Take your time to do the research or call your local borough's renters committee. And another thing that you can do to prevent illegal rent increases is to transfer your lease before it comes up for renewal so that you have direct contact with the next tenant and you can share relevant information like the rent you pay so that it stays the same. If you do have to move at the end of your lease, you can mail your lease to the next tenant after a few weeks. That way they can compare that information themselves. So that's it. Those are some of the ways that you can protect your rights as a tenant in Quebec. I'm Verity Stevenson, and I'm a reporter for CBC in Montreal.